coming up on the end of this little N64 retrospective of mine, and though I feel like I've covered all the major highlights of the library, I'm only just scratching the surface of what the console has to offer. So today, I have 10 more highlights that I wanted to include but couldn't fit into the schedule. These are 10 more N64 highlights. Remember I said there were only 2 N64 DD games that were worth playing? Well, I covered F-Zero X expansion pack, so I figured I might as well talk about the other one, Doshin the Giant. The game is basically a god simulator where you take control of a giant and assist some locals in building their civilization. The game was innovative for its real-time gameplay and the ability to manipulate the game world as you saw fit. Sadly, the N64 DD version of the game is a little difficult to recommend due to the fact that you have to jump through some hoops to get it running, and that there has never been an English translation of the game. Thankfully, there is a GameCube version of the game that did get an English release, so if this piques your interest, that's the version I recommend.
While
we're on the subject of Japan-only games, let's take a look at Custom Robo. This game centers around a children's game where guilds build toy robots and pit them against each other. The game takes the form of an action RPG with story progression and what have you taking place via an overworld, and battles that are conducted in the form of one-on-one arena battles. 2 robots are launched into an arena, and the last man standing wins. The gameplay is fast-paced and frantic, and as the game goes on, you unlock weapons and attachments to mix up how your robot plays. It's pretty damn cool, and to be honest, this is what I always wanted from a 3D Pokemon game. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Custom Robo was an attempt at making something with the markability of Pokemon. It clearly didn't succeed in that regard, but there is no denying that the game is of a high quality. Why it wasn't released here in America, I have no idea. It was seriously one of the biggest surprises of doing this entire retrospective. Now how about a game that has never been released? Dinosaur Planet was Rare's attempt to put out an action-adventure game in the vein of Zelda. However, with the N64's death right around the corner, it was decided that the game would be moved to the GameCube. It was then decided by Nintendo to turn the game into a Star Fox title, when Miyamoto noted how similar one of the characters looked to Fox McCloud. The choice to turn Dinosaur Planet into Star Fox Adventures proved to be a misguided one, as while it wasn't a terrible game, it wasn't something anyone was asking for. Since then, fans have wondered what Dinosaur Planet would have been like if Star Fox had never landed there. A curiosity that has recently been satisfied when the ROM leaked online. And I gotta say, as someone who played the hell out of Star Fox Adventures back in the day, it was fascinating to play this. Though it's lacking several coats of polish, it is cool to see what could have been a promising new franchise if Nintendo had just stayed out of it. If you are a fan of Star Fox Adventures, this one comes highly recommended. For those of you looking for something more traditional than Super Smash Bros., I'd say Killer Instinct Gold is the way to go. Now I know that Killer Instinct is sort of a sore spot for many N64 fans. After all, when KI first hit arcades in the 90s, it was widely believed to be a showcase of what the N64 could do. Many anticipated a port, but it sadly never came. Killer Instinct Gold is actually a port of KI2, which wasn't as popular, and even then it was seen as something of a butcher port. However, if you put all that aside, I think you'll find that this is a perfectly serviceable fighting game, with great graphics, a memorable cast of characters, and some brutal and fast-paced gameplay. It might not be worth its weight in gold, but it still packs one hell of a wallop. Duty games were something of a rarity on the N64, as was the style at the time, but there were still a couple. Created by Treasure Games, Mischief Makers is yet another fine example of a hidden gem. The game sees you taking the role of a robot girl as she tries to save her creator from villains. Though it might appear basic, Mischief Makers does a lot of really cool stuff, and it makes for one of the craziest games on the N64. Though it might suffer from some somewhat sluggish controls here and there, the game is constantly surprising you with wild and inventive ideas, though that should come as no surprise considering this team would also make Sin and Punishment. Definitely recommend it to fans of side-scrollers.
Yeah! 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 Yeah!
There weren't a lot of options on the N64 when it came to RPGs, but there were one or two other than Paper Mario that were worth playing, and this is one of them. The fourth game in the often forgotten series, Ogre Battle 64 sees you taking command of an army and battling evil in a medieval setting. Though it leans more towards a tactical RPG rather than a JRPG, it is still effective at what it sets out to do, not to mention a decent story and some cool pre-rendered graphics. Though not as groundbreaking as games released on the PS1, you can still do a lot worse than this. Based on the title, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Doom 64 is just Doom on the N64, much like Quake 64, Duke Nukem 64, and Daikatana 64. However, unlike those games, which are mere ports, Doom 64 is a completely new game with new graphics, levels, and direction. The game leans more into the realm of horror than any game in the series up to that point, and it is extremely effective. It's also still Doom as you likely know and love it, something the game was criticized for in its day, as many complained that it failed to push the genre forward like GoldenEye or Turok. However, while those games were innovative, they would end up aging as a result. Doom 64, on the other hand, has only gotten better with age, and thus it's my pick for the best FPS on the console. With extreme sports games blowing up in the 90s, it would have been foolish for Nintendo not to bring Excitebike to the N64. And though Excitebike 64 may not have been a huge seller, it's still a really fun game. I think the main reason it's so much fun to play is because of how different it is from something like Wave Race 64 or 1080 snowboarding. Whereas those games are more pick up and play, there is a greater learning curve to Excitebike 64. You really gotta get used to the game's mechanics, and though it might be frustrating at first, it is so satisfying when you get the hang of it and manage to cross the finish line in first place. Though certainly not my first choice of racer, it is for sure worth checking out. There are two reasons I wanted to highlight Rocket Robot on Wheels. For starters, this was the first game created by one of my favorite studios, Sucker Punch Productions. That's right, the same team behind Sly Cooper, Infamous, and Ghost of Tsushima. But also because it's probably the most underrated 3D platformer on the console. With its innovative physics-based mechanics, colorful graphics, and memorable gameplay, Rocket is a hidden gem that's just begging for your attention. And to close out this video, I figured I should take a look at the game that I'm sure people will say should have gotten its own dedicated video. Perfect Dark was Rare's unofficial follow-up to GoldenEye. After losing access to the 007 IP, Rare will create a new IP centered around a secret agent in a Blade Runner style future. It was cool as ice, and it made for one of the most impressive games on the console. However, I opted not to include it in the main lineup for the sake of variety. As good as Perfect Dark is, it is at the end of the day just a more polished version of GoldenEye, so I decided to sidelight it here and look at some other titles. Don't take that to mean that Perfect Dark is not worth your time. Though not as fondly remembered as GoldenEye, I would say that it is a superior game in just about every respect. And its exclusion from the main lineup of videos should, if anything, be an indication of how stacked the N64's lineup was. And now that I've highlighted everything I wanted to, I'd say it's time we wrap things up. So join me tomorrow as we close out the N64 Retrospective with a countdown of the best games the console has to offer. I'll see you then.